What's up, YouTube family? We are heading into video number 6 of Discouraged to Willing, in which we're going to talk about how to harness confusion. God dang confusion. Yes, it's a thing. And especially as we're talking about entering the unknown woods to move from the familiar self to the unfamiliar self, to move from discouraged to willing, whatever state A and state B is, you're going to be experiencing confusion. Because confusion arises from the not knowing, okay? And actually, we can reframe our relationship with confusion. We can actually learn how to, for sure, harness it, but also lean into the thing. Like what I was speaking about of leaning in to failure so that you can progress to the next step. And that you resisting that is you resisting the necessary growth process in which there is going to be failure. That's just the fact. If you want to actually attain some sort of degree of authenticity in a thing, mastery in a thing, you're going to have to fail in it. And that's okay. So it's okay that you feel confused. It's okay. I know for myself, I would massively judge myself when I enter into states of confusion, of this not knowing. And of course, the reflections come of like, how wonderful, what a great sign. And when I'm in that state of confusion, I'm like, yeah, sure, a great sign. Just like twitching in the corner. So yeah, it's really what we're going to be speaking about in this video are multiple sort of ways to look at confusion. For example, what is confusion, why it arises. We're also going to lean a little bit more into discernment, right? Because from confusion arises clarity and discernment as a tool to do that. And held within that, we're also going to look more into the differences between the voice of ego and the voice of soul. I laid in the last video that ego, blind love, is more connected to fate, and soul, mature love, is more connected to destiny. So I won't be going so much into the fate destiny side of things, focusing more on the ego soul. And then we'll then get into some practical tips of how to harness confusion so that you can move through these unknown woods, these uncharted territories with more kindness, ease, and grace. So a power-packed video we have ahead. Let's get straight into it. So on the path of being in a more willing state, of showing up for your creative self, of discovering who you truly are. So we could say that's self-actualization, right? Confusion isn't just a barrier that is saying go back. It's actually a sign of progress. Woo! Done. That's it. Video ended. Bye. Amazing. So we're going to be exploring, as I said, the various sides of confusion. And really what you're going to see is that confusion is a powerful catalyst for personal growth, for self-actualization, for progress. So confusion is a necessary part of this rite of passage of entering into the unknown, of traversing the river of change, right? And so what is confusion really? Well, confusion is a sort of state of not knowing. My understanding of confusion, whilst I don't have a dictionary definition right here, my sense of confusion and my feeling of confusion is this state of haze. It's this state of so many things like all at once. And so there's it can kind of be akin to a state of overwhelm. A scribble, if you're a visual person, I see that as confusion. More of a clairsentient sort of body sense, super heady, right? So yeah, how confusion feels in your system, it might be different, but that's really the essence of it. It's really this state of a lack of clarity, this state of there are things, there are options, but I don't actually know which way to go. I don't know what to pick. I don't know what decision to make. I don't know how to discern right from wrong, good from bad, ego from soul, right? It's a not knowing. Sadhguru, he says, if you are I'm going to say that again. Sadhguru has this quote, which goes like this, quote, "It is good if you are confused. It means you are constantly stepping into new territory." Exactly. Confusion arises when our current understanding, our current world and reality is challenged by new experiences, new insights, those abrupt changes, so to speak, which catalyze that entering into the unknown woods, right? There comes confusion. And so in this state of overwhelm, this is really when we get the opportunity to drop from the mind, the mentalization, conceptualization, analysis, paralysis, freak out, the rational mind that cannot access or comprehend what it already doesn't have access to, and drop into the heart, which does have access to what we currently aren't rationally aware of, let's say. So as I've alluded to already, confusion really arises from the catalyst of being catalyzed into an unknown state, a life change, a challenge, an ordeal. And then more specifically, the actual state of confusion arises from this grappling with the mind, right? I'm sure you've experienced that with confusion. I know for myself, confusion is also a kind of self-defense mechanism where I don't want to face something head on. I don't want to accept something as it is. Have you experienced that too? Where this state of not knowing and haze arises when you just don't want to accept something or look at it head on. Yep, you and me alike, my friend. So basically somewhere, somehow, there's a realization that came into your life that the life you're currently living isn't enough in some way. It doesn't fulfill you in the way that you know life can fulfill you. So you want to know and experience something else. And this is not about demeaning or diminishing your present experience. It's actually about honoring your present experience by seeing that where you've been limiting yourself, seeing that you aren't meeting your potential, you aren't fulfilling your destiny, let's say. You're settling for mediocrity. So by accepting that, you can then move into the next step. And when this sort of mix-up happens, let's say, you are neither here nor there. And there, in this state, in this river of change, of this neither at A or B, there comes confusion. This is why it arises. So here's another longer quote from Sadhguru, and it's going to appear on the screen so you can follow along with me. So, quote, "After having made the effort to step into the unfamiliar, there is no point in stepping back into the familiar. That's a backward step. When things get mixed up, don't step back. If you are stepping into unfamiliar territory on a daily basis, you will always be confused. This confusion needs to be handled properly and productively, rather than becoming a self-defeating process. You just need more vision to see things clearly. The ability to see life the way it is does not come free. You have to do the necessary things to get the discrimination. It won't happen by accident." End quote. That's also what we're going to get into, a little bit about the difference between a productive form of confusion and a self-defeating form of confusion. Because remember, there are two sides to the coin. Meta side of the coin is is confusion clarity, and zooming into confusion, productive, non-productive confusion, right? So we're going to look at that. Really important point here, which we just spoke about, of this realization of limits and limitations that you've been placing upon yourself or living within. This is such a key component of actually being able to surrender into the mystery and embrace the unknown, right? By realizing your limitations, you also acknowledge for sure this sense of unfulfillment, right? The fact that your current life, the way that you're living it could be more creative, it could be more meaningful, it could be more rich and passionate, you know? So sure, there's that side of the realization of limitations. And another side, by understanding and realizing your limitations, a different version of that is that you also acknowledge your humanness. And in and of itself, by being a human, you are flawed. You are not capital P perfect, which in and of itself, as a finite expression of the infinite, is kind of perfect and kind of beautiful. But by recognizing your limitations as being a finite human form, you embrace your humanness, which in and of itself is a form of healthy shame. John Bradshaw, who wrote the book Healing the Shame That Binds You, he distinguishes the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame, which is super interesting. I recommend you read that further. That's not in the scope of this video today necessarily. But understanding our limitations also means that we don't put unrealistic expectations upon ourselves, which is healing. That can defeat confusion, right? Or at least allows you to harness the thing, because you're not supposed to have all the answers all the time. That's not what this game is about. Woo! Okay, great. Let's lean into that a little more. You're on a more elemental level, the element of earth, it also teaches us about limitations. Okay? The element of earth teaches us that there is this hand here, which isn't the table necessarily. From a different perspective, it's the same thing, it's also the table. But here in the 3D physical realm, here is my hand, here is the table. If I knock on the table, my hand is not going to go through the table. There's a limitation, there's a boundary. So we can equate a limit with a boundary as well. And boundaries aren't in and of themselves bad. They're actually really necessary. And that's what the unknown woods also teach you. They teach you how to be able to perceive a boundary that you have and establish them. And realizing the lesson of limitations and boundaries is also really a blessing, especially creatively, because you learn how to work within the limits. Drawing from the video about cultivating consistency, we learn to create a container of time, let's say, and in that container of time, there is a dynamic movement of energy, you splash paint on the canvas and so on, but you know that it's going to happen because you've agreed upon this container of time happening on Tuesday at 3 p.m., right? So without the limits, without the container, how can anything happen? Using a sort of practical example, without the limits of a canvas, without the container of time to work on the thing, how are you going to create? Without a watering can, how are you going to put water onto the plants? Or let's say you have a watering can and it's got a gazillion holes in it. Leakage, nothing contained and whole, and nothing can happen. But if you have that container of water and the water's just like doing its thing in the container, you can move it and you can deliver it where it needs to go. So we could say that you can only really do a thing, create a thing, when you know its territory, when you know its limits and boundaries. You can't work on everything at the same time, okay? If you try to do project depression, project anger, project grief, project realism, art, business, family, relationships, depression, ecstatic bliss, joy, traveling the world, going to all the countries, if you try to do that at the same time, you will just explode. But also, you'll be paralyzed because you can't do it. You can't do everything at the same time. Sure, if we zoom out and out and out in the higher degrees of the fractal of all of life, it's all happening at the same time. Sure, but that's a bypass. Here in this physical plane, we have time, the construct of time. Thank you, Saturn. And so we need to learn how to harness that. But we also have the container of this body. We have the limits of the canvas, right? We have a screen, right? We have a frame. If I move my hand out here, you can't see me, okay? Boundaries, limits. It's so obvious somehow, but really we can overlook how important this is when we are speaking about finding clarity and creative power, right? And not demonizing confusion, because confusion is also telling us when there's a necessary, let's say confusion kind of shows us when we're being invited to try something a little bit different or create more structure in our lives, or try something new, not try to hold on to the known because it's not helping us, right? We're clearly confused, so there needs to be new information, new insights, new experiences that need to come through. So confusion, just like fear, is that beautiful signpost that we're entering into the unknown, we're progressing, we're evolving. Amazing. So I want to just speak about, as we're on this topic, how to actually harness confusion as this way shower of your needs and limits, connecting it to finding clarity and creative power from boundaries and limits. So how do you find clarity and creative power through boundaries and limits? Well, first, you need to understand boundaries, defining personal limits, identifying and setting limits for your time, your energy, your resources. Okay, are you going to just go to the supermarket and spend every single dollar that you have at the supermarket? Totally boundaryless, right? You know, we're working with boundaries all the time. Another example, are you going to show up to, let's say, are you going to walk into a cafe and then just go and completely lie your body on the table of some person who you don't know, and then like roll all over onto them and then follow them home, and then just like ditch all your other commitments and just start doing what they do? Extreme example, but you get what I mean. It's totally boundaryless. And you're also violating their boundaries, most likely. Particularly with time like this, setting containers of time. Are you just going to get up and then spend your entire day on your phone, even though you maybe even have kids to care for, a job to go to, be it at home or in office somewhere? Boundaryless, right? Not constructive. And there's no power there. Absolutely none, because you're just leaking everywhere. So you need to define your personal limits. On another level, you need to create space. That space could be physical space, but also the space of time for creative work, for reflection. If you're in the unknown woods, that isn't necessarily a permission slip to throw away everything that has been providing a sense of structure for you, let's say. It might need to modify, but you do need the time for moving creative energy, for self-reflecting, so that you can progress and make that next step forward in the unknown woods instead of walking in a circle. Okay. The next thing that you can do is, once you know your boundaries and understand your boundaries, is to establish them. Okay? And by establishing them, we're also speaking about enforcing them. Be it prioritizing tasks and letting people know if they're in your space that you're not available to chat for the next 2 hours, or prioritizing tasks so that you're not overcommitting, right? To ensure quality over quantity. Learning to say no, not just saying yes to absolutely everything and spreading yourself thin, right? Because the spreading yourself thin does also exacerbate a sense of confusion, because it's like digging 20 shallow holes versus one deep one and actually accessing the water, right? And scheduling like let's say, refresh times, breaks, right? So that you can recharge and maintain your focus and your creative energy. Another way by harnessing the confusion and emerging into a state of clarity and creative power is to realize your limits. Acknowledge your limits of time, resources, and skill, right? Work within these limits to fuel your creativity and innovation. Like, all right, I've already tried it out. I've been going weeks on end and I still haven't sat down to do anything creative. I haven't made time to see my friends or to call my family. Okay, here is a 1 hour block on this day at this time. It's happening. There's a framework. Then it gets filled with what you've set as the intention for that container, right? And by realizing your limits, you are implicitly realizing your strengths. You're leveraging your existing strengths and resources, okay? Because you recognize that my forte isn't complicated mathematics. Just isn't. You know, if I really, really focused on the thing, sure, I could probably get good, but I would just be like so devoid of any heart energy. Like, no. Or you're someone who's like absolutely not someone who speaks in front of people. Like, I'll do the background stuff, I'll be behind the scenes, but nowhere am I speaking in front of the folks. Like, I'll help you back there. I'll be the foundation holding you up, right? Focus on your strengths. That's cool. And that's also how you harness confusion. You know, if everything's happening, all the things, it strips the crap away and it shows you your unique medicine. It shows you your unique strengths. When everything's up in the air, when overwhelm is here, it's almost like the path of least resistance emerges for you. So lean into that. That's how you harness confusion and access clarity and creative power. Okay, and then essentially when you do that, this realizes willingness from discouragement, because the boundaries, the limitations, they provide a clear path. They provide measurable milestones, right? It's easier to stay motivated because you know on that day that's happening, and you know that you're going to do the cleaning because you've set the time for it. And so that is you putting energy in your willingness bank account, as I like to use as an analogy. And this improves your resilience, right? Working with the limitations, working with the confusion helps you build resilience and adaptability, right? Which sustains the motivation. Because when you have been able to grasp onto things which have made sense, there's a, how do you say, it's like you can easily go on a sort of autopilot mode. There's no need for anything different. If everything was great, there's no catalyst for change. There's no catalyst for something different. So this is where the resilience and the adaptability comes in, because being thrown into the unknown means that you get to draw on your resources from before, but then they alchemize into something new, which is obviously an unknown process. So resilience comes in when it doesn't happen maybe as fast as you'd like, or it catalyzes a different kind of challenge, which is the exact circumstance you need to learn the lesson that you need to learn in that stage. And that is the massive birthplace of creativity, right? I've referred to this quote like 3 times now, but I'm going to refer to it again. It's the quote from Joe Dispenza's book of how nothing new emerges from the known. Newness is birthed from the unknown. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's the essence of it. Something new is birthed from the unknown. So that's why harnessing confusion is the birthplace of creativity a lot of the time. And you don't get that in the monotonous, comfortable, safe, everyday is the same kind of life because there's no catalyst for growth. Think of this beautiful planet that we live on. Evolution is catalyzed by stuff changing, by, I don't know, the weather just getting hectic, and then over time the plants and the animals need to adapt to meet the changes in their environment, right? Super basic, but it's the same for us, even though we're not in the wild woods, you know, literally, like metaphysically, we're in the wild woods when that catalyst comes in, the big life change, the challenge, the ordeal, having to leave your house, breaking up with a long-term relationship, moving to a different country. Boom, there's your catalyst. There's confusion. But the seeds of innovative creativity emerge. Woo! Love that. Okay, so the summary of that is essentially that, as we spoke about, the realizing of your limitations is a form of healthy shame. So you don't have all these unrealistic expectations on yourself. But it's also where you implicitly realize your strengths that you already have. And then in that neither here nor there river of change, there emerges your unique medicine. There emerges your own path of least resistance. And there emerges the alchemy of something new, which is setting you up for the future version of self, for being more willing, for accessing the unfamiliar heaven, right? So, yay. I love that. Obviously, as we've spoken about, confusion marks a transition from the familiar to the unfamiliar. Just want to reinforce that point because we need it repeated to us things in order to learn. Like, it would be great if we could just learn everything hearing it once. And sometimes it works like that because everything that came before kind of led to that moment and then boom, light bulb. Cool. But in other cases, repetition is the mother of all learning. So confusion arises when we are moving from the familiar to the unfamiliar because you're in something new. You don't have a textbook telling you how to get through the thing. There is your reconnection to your channel and your unique creative code. So chaos is how it might look. It might feel like chaos. Confusion, I know for myself, feels kind of chaotic in my own being. It feels chaotic in my mind. But, quote, chaos is just a higher form of order that we don't understand yet. Boom, end quote. Thank you, Zachary Ellis. So how radical would it be if we actually consciously created chaos in our own life? Ha! I'm not saying that you have to necessarily do that, but if you want to kind of fast track this process for yourself, lean into the chaos a little bit, okay? I'll get to that a little bit later, but I'm just kind of planting that seed right now, okay? And with a disclaimer, like, don't do this if you totally feel that's going to destabilize the crap out of you and you're not able to hold that. So, this aside, we'll get into that in a bit. Let's just move on. Like, drop that seed there, but we'll get to it. Like how there are the constructive forms of failure and the non-constructive forms of failure, we got productive forms of confusion and we've got self-defeating forms of confusion. Okay. Because confusion marks the transition from the familiar to the unfamiliar, it doesn't immediately mean that you're going to be able to take it in your stride and then harness the confusion and then boom, get through to the other side 5 minutes later. In most cases, you might experience the self-defeating kinds of confusion. You might feel victimized. You might feel like it's way too much and you just want to like curl up and hide. Compassion to that, okay? No judgment there. Though remember that that's not what confusion is in its entirety. It also has a higher octave kind of productive form, which we've spoken about before, how the productive form can kind of lead to the creative innovation, right? The clarity, the power. So a point that I just want to reinforce real quick is how there's no going back. You know, after a big change happens in your life, how can you go back from that? You know, every day might look kind of similar to how it was before, but from that node, nothing will be the exact same anymore. So there's no point trying to go back. And maybe it takes a little bit longer, you know, but that's okay. There's no going back. There's no point in even trying to go back. So the productive form of confusion is essentially being able to see it as this catalyst of progress. Okay. The productive versus self-defeating confusion, and where you are actually sitting between those two, is mostly a perspectival kind of shift. It's like, where is your focus? How do you relate with confusion? So in order to make confusion productive, first allow it to be framed as something positive. And I'm not saying toxic positivity, love and light, baby. I'm just saying there's a necessary time to just acknowledge the thing as something productive, you know, as something useful. You know, refer to the video about embracing and reframing failure, because that NLP technique of reframing is super useful here as well. Apply it to this too. If your current belief around confusion is that it's this terrible barrier and it's a bad sign and you need to go back, great that you know that and you can reframe it. Confusion is productive when it allows you to actually enhance your focus, because it gives you access to what your strengths already are, so you can leverage them, right? It's productive confusion when it helps you to acknowledge your limitations, right? It's productive confusion when it helps you to enforce boundaries, or to even understand what boundaries are, right? If you're confused because you've got a gazillion things happening in one day, it's implicitly teaching you what your limits of time, energy, and resources are. That's super productive, right? It's productive because it's setting you up in a beneficial way rather than a destructive way. And in saying that, sure, within the cycle of life, death, rebirth, creation, maintenance, destruction is inherent in creation. Okay, something may need to die in order to be reborn, which is also kind of what happens in moving from the familiar self to the unfamiliar self. Well, for you guys, it would be the familiar self to the unfamiliar self, right? So cool, that's a productive form of confusion. A self-defeating form of confusion is one that elicits victimhood, is one that catalyzes an externalization of blame, shadow projection, like all the evil, all the crap is out there, there's nothing wrong with me. The victim, of course, being, oh, woe is me, everything's happening against me, it's only happening to me, this sucks, I'm never going to be able to figure this out, I'm always so useless, right? This is victim. That's a self-defeating form of confusion, because it's not creating a foundation from which you can build your new self. It's a downward spiral, right? It's a loop, it's a toxic loop. And that adds fuel to the fire of more self-defeating stuff, and more reasons why you should stay a victim, and more reasons why you're so crap at life. Okay? self-defeating forms of confusion lead to a kind of apathy. Okay? Apathy being that state where there's zero motivation or zero way to see why doing a thing is useful. There's no point kind of thing. So you feel the difference there between a productive and self-defeating form of confusion? I mean, I certainly do. They're super different. I hope that this does show again how there's always a higher octave expression and a lower octave expression of a thing. So to summarize that, a productive form of confusion assists you in gaining vision and ultimately clarity, actually, because it's allowing you to build your foundation. It's allowing you to realize your limitations, implicitly realizing your strengths. Cool. But a self-defeating form of confusion leads to victimhood, externalization of blame, apathy, and a downward spiral, and not actually helping you build a foundation from which to move forward through the necessary initiation of the unknown. La la! This leads us on to talk about the difference between the voice of ego and the voice of soul. We could, if we're going to look at it so like black and white, the voice of ego will tend to feed more the self-defeating form of criticism. Why do I keep saying criticism? Confusion. And the voice of soul will feed more the productive form of confusion. Yes, I didn't say criticism. But it's also not that black and white, okay? So bear with me. I want to start with a quote from this book called How Things Exist. I'll show you the cover in a sec. This one? Wait, there you go. Page 93. And it goes like this. Quote, "The mind of a worldly being, someone who hasn't realized emptiness, can discriminate between correct conventional truth and wrong conventional truth. However, the mind of a worldly being can't recognize the object to be refuted, that things that appear to exist from their own side are hallucinations. In reality, while at the beginning it looks as if you should be able to find it, the I, that is, as soon as you start to logically analyze whether or not it exists as it appears to exist, it immediately becomes unclear. What appears to be a real I from its own side immediately becomes unclear as soon as you apply the logic of dependent arising to it. As you analyze more and more, the real I from its own side becomes more and more unclear." End quote. Interesting, interesting, interesting. Why I refer to this quote is that there's a sort of meta holding of it being a teaching on emptiness. And for me, this emptiness really felt quite akin to that beautiful state of emptiness that can arise when you're confused, when you don't know, and you surrender into that not knowing. And then the I that you thought you were starts to dissolve. Okay? And another layer of why this quote feels relevant is that there's the part of like the analyzing and the analyzing, it connects to how confusion can also arise from this over-analyzing, this grappling with the mind, which actually doesn't help. It makes the confusion worse. So, I hope you enjoyed that. Let us move now more onto the difference between ego and soul and how this ultimately builds discernment. Discernment being something we spoke about in the last video. As you may have sensed already, everything in this reality is really programmed for you. Everything is a general term, but yeah, generally speaking, things in this reality are programmed for you to follow what the collective is doing, what the collective wants, instead of you celebrating and following your own soulful self, which isn't necessarily the status quo. The system wants, it's self-perpetuating, right? And in order for it to live, it needs the beings that it's kind of puppeting to do what it's doing already, so it can remain the same, so it can live. And that's also what feeds the collective unconscious, which can be a default program that the ego kind of runs off. Okay. On the other side of things, the soul, it wants you to discover who you truly are. It doesn't just want to conform. It doesn't want to stay numb. It doesn't want to be controlled by these toxic programs that say that it's only this or that, super black and white, right? It doesn't want to be controlled by toxic programs which say there are only these options for you in this lifetime for how to survive and thrive. You know, soul ain't into that. The soul can absolutely harness confusion and make it the guiding light through the darkness as you realize who you truly are. The Sufi poet Rumi once wrote, quote, "There is a voice that doesn't use words. Listen," end quote. Thank you, Rumi. Beautiful, beautiful words. So what is that voice that doesn't use words? Ta-da! It's the soul. Because remember, the soul speaks in symbol. The soul speaks in self-responsibility. The soul speaks in creativity, the creative impulse. So listen. Listen with the non-physical ears that you have. Listen with your non-physical eyes. Right? Okay. So, the voice of ego. We can connect this to fate. We can connect this to blind love. We can connect this to the default programs. The characteristics of the ego are driven, generally speaking, by fear, image, hierarchy, external validation. More for you is less for me, right? Competition, comparison, criticism. Okay? This is kind of how it understands itself. You over here, me over here. Okay? At a fork in the road, the voice of ego kind of can come from this place of fear and contraction. And it relies on external factors to make that call, where to go. The voice of ego can really be that voice that urges you to stay in unhappy situations. And for example, like being in this life and realizing that it's not fulfilling your potential. But boom, then comes the fear as the pain body starts to come through and realizes that change is going to need to happen. And it freaks out because it wants you to stay the same. It wants you to stay safe, safety being equated to the known. So here comes the voice of ego in many cases. And the voice of the ego brings decision making that is quite narrow, limited, and fear-based, right? In terms of like the factors that are quite image-based, the voice of the ego is more like, how can I be the hero, right? The voice of the ego equally is like, why me? Victim. Or the voice of ego could be like, only I can fix this. Rescuer. Right? Very like independence as a trauma response kind of thing. I mean, this is not an exhaustive definition of the voice of ego, so just acknowledge that. It's very simple, but you get the feeling of it. On the other side, the voice of soul, which is more connected to destiny, which is more connected to something more conscious and intuitive, right? It's more characteristically driven by intuition, driven by a sense of a higher purpose. It's like the voice of your higher self, higher guidance, right? The voice of your soul is often quite soft, vulnerable, though it's oftentimes very direct and doesn't loop or repeat itself necessarily, right? Whilst the voice of ego can be direct, it's often can be quite urgent, like this has to happen now, doom, gloom, catastrophization, right? So on the other side, the voice of soul, yeah, it can be direct, but there's a sort of softness about it. It's like kind of matter of fact, and it's not super duper charged, okay? Generally speaking, of course there are outliers, but you know. The voice of soul is, and how you know it's the voice of soul is when you know something kind of with like complete calm and clarity, but you just don't know why, or you just don't know why it is that way. It's kind of like an undeniable instinct that offers you a clear direction. And this clarity transcends practical logic and comes from a realm that is kind of higher in vibration, more transcendent, right? And it doesn't necessarily tell you how or why, it just is. And then emerges the next step, then emerges the how and the why. An example of the voice of soul could be, stop the pity party, go for a walk. That's it. Like a direct but loving parent. You feel the difference? So, a little bit left to go. I want to move now into the practical tips for navigating confusion. So this has sort of been built up from what we've covered in this video so far, and just drawing from the discernment between the voice of ego and soul, this will also help you to harness confusion so that clarity and creative power, whatever, can come through. And actually something that is really helpful in order to be able to discern between ego and soul, before we move on, is if a decision, let's say, when you're at that fork of the road, is to ask yourself, does this decision feel like shackles on or shackles off? Okay, we'll leave it there. Practical ways to harness confusion. Let's go. There are 11 of these. So the first practical way that you can harness confusion is to very simply breathe deeply. Breath does so much more than obviously keeping you alive. It's also the thing which carries intention. It allows you to calm your nervous system when harnessed properly. It allows you to cultivate power when harnessed properly. It actually brings more energy and strength in your system, right? And when you harness the breath, you can connect to this centered, knowing part of yourself that can find calm amidst confusion, even if it's just that. Because when you can find the calm amidst the confusion, it's easier for the next things to emerge, like the realizations that can get you to the next step. The second step for navigating and harnessing confusion is to embrace the wisdom of your dreams. If the conscious mind is just not able to make sense of a thing, in the dreaming at night, if you're able to remember your dreams, and you can of course learn how to do that by just starting to write your dreams down when you first wake up, your dreams will possess images and meanings and insights and messages that your conscious mind hasn't been able to give space for in the waking life, right? And so if you can actually take the time to harness the wisdom of your dreams, you're going to be able to discover insights, right? Something that your rational mind just couldn't know in order to navigate the next step. You might get an image which you decode is the kind of, let's say, book that you need to read, right? It might symbolically show you the sort of information that's lacking for you, or the skill that's lacking, or the kind of place that you need to go, okay? So don't underestimate the power of your dreams. In many cases for me, my dreams show me even what's happening in the next day. And so on a subconscious level, like I've already prepared for it. And of course the dreams as well can show me what's actually going on in my inner realm, which I might not have given space for. In more charged or intense periods of my life, a recurring dream symbol that I would get would be a tsunami. So in the dream, I would see this huge wall of water approaching and fear is rising. And for me, this was a depiction of how there was a lot of intense emotions that I was experiencing in my life that I wasn't processing, which was eliciting a fear response, a contraction, an overwhelm, right? In its most extreme cases, a kind of fear of death, but death not in the literal sense, more the death as in the necessity to let things go, being washed clean by this huge wall of water. So maybe there are repeated symbols in your dreams which are actually trying to show you something. It's your soul trying to communicate with you, being like, yo, pay attention to this. It's going to help you to move forward with more clarity in order to be able to decode why the confusion is here and where you should place your focus, right? Cool. So number 3, something really fun, but also super useful. Dance. Move your body freely. If that's dance for you, great, do that. If that is like moving qigong, right, where it's just a lot of shaking and spinning the body and moving energy in this way, do that. So much of the time, our confusion, the haze, the stuck emotions can be unlocked and moved through movement. Okay, moving the energy through your system so that the energy of stuckness can also move through. This connects you with your body, this connects you with your emotions, and this allows this sense of stuckness and haze and resistance to transform. Okay, the 4th thing you can do is follow the thread. Okay, pay attention to the symbols, the synchronicities that are coming through in your life, right? And whilst we don't have to have everything figured out, this is you allowing the story to emerge before your very eyes in its own time. So tend to the symbols, the cues, the synchronicities that are coming your way, because they're often exactly that, cues and clues of to what the next step is for you. What's the thing that you need? Follow the thread of your fascination. Follow the thread of seeing this person all the time that just shows up in your life. And maybe it's not explicitly this person that you need to hang out with, but maybe it's what they do, the world that they're enmeshed in. Okay, so also don't take things necessarily exactly literally, because it's symbolism as well. But following the thread is also you leaning into the bit of confusion of not knowing what that thread means, but not grasping onto it, opening yourself, dropping from mind to heart. So then the next thing emerges, trusting that you will be given the insight when the time is right. The fifth thing that you can do is trust in what you love, okay? Following the thread is essentially about cultivating a deep trust in what you love. That's one facet of it for sure. Following the thread, of course, can be guiding you to something which you don't know yet or something that's new. But you discover that you love it, right? So what are the things that make your heart beat loud and proud, right? No matter how odd it feels with your current life, make some room in the coming days and the coming weeks to honor what really brings you alive. Okay, that's what you can do. Number 6 is let the rhythms of nature guide you. So like what we spoke about in the last video of how entering the dark woods of the unknown, right? It essentially also helps you to see that there is wisdom in things that we take for granted, such as there being seasons. It's not summer all the time. There's also autumn. There's also winter. And then emerges spring, right? And those cycles exist within you too. So this is countering this living in a constant state of stimulation and productivity and hustle, right? And this generally leads to a state of exhaustion and overwhelm. But when we turn to the natural world, we are exposed to moon cycles, sun cycles, seasons, the rhythms of rise and fall, fullness and emptiness, right? And trying to live all the time in the rising and the peak and no time at all in the emptiness is exhausting, and it's not possible, really. What comes up must come down. It's the nature of duality. So make some time to embrace the falling, embrace the emptiness, embrace the confusion, the not knowing, which immerses you in this experience of mystery, okay? Like lavish in it, you know? If it helps to make it more romantic, do that, okay? But find a way that you can actually just sort of surrender into it. Another way which could help you to surrender into it is to release what no longer serves you, what's no longer necessary. That can be in a very physical sense, like declutter your house, okay? We so often accumulate so many things over the days and weeks and years, but actually require energy to maintain, okay? If you have, let's say, 100 points of energy, and 50 of those points are used by all the stuff that you have, and it's actually not serving you, then free up 20 points, right? Don't underestimate that. I mean, there have been phases where I have had more sort of accumulation and more culling, and there's a sort of emptiness that comes with that of like, oh my God, my old identity. But every single time, it's just created space for the new thing. You can also reflect on what no longer serves you in terms of the more the different kinds of the company that you keep, right? So for sure your physical items, but also maybe habits that you have, maybe even people in your life which no longer feel like you're moving in the same direction, or they kind of feel like a ball and chain in your life. And no judgment there, and no need to judge the person, but just an acknowledgement that this isn't working. You can ask yourself as well, what are the thoughts, the attitudes, the expectations about life that I have that are keeping me from my freedom, that are keeping me from opening to the mystery of life, okay? And then how do you try to control the direction of your life rather than yielding to grace, yielding and opening to the mystery? Another way to say that is, where is the mind grappling with everything, trying to analyze, which makes it way more confusing. Okay? And the kind of self-defeating confusing, not the productive confusing necessarily. Number 8 is remember that you will die. Keep death daily before your eyes. This is never an act of morbid obsession, but it's a reminder of life's incredible gifts, okay? This puts things into perspective, okay? Instead of hyperfixating on all the things that go wrong, hyper dwelling on a state of confusion, of feeling like you should be doing better and everything sucks, or dwelling on a past argument with a loved one, acknowledging that everything dies, that everything must go through this cycle of life, death, rebirth, it really does put things into perspective, because it actually allows you to see what's really important and therefore what is not important. It allows you to see that there are things that are wasting your time. There are things that you're kind of just keeping around which aren't useful. There is a whole life that is waiting to be lived, which is more in alignment with your destiny. That's the power of holding it in the back of your psyche somewhere that death is coming for everyone. So don't waste time dwelling on the crap. Reprioritize and realign your focus. Number 9 is to ask for the wisdom of your ancestors. You are standing on their shoulders. You are the inheritor of generations of stories, of experiences, of memories, of blessings, of burdens. They beat through our blood and our bone, right? So your grandmothers, your grandfathers, your great-great-grandfathers, your great-great-grandmothers, and all the way back, okay, they also experienced challenges. They also experienced confusion. And so we can call upon the support of those ones to support us in the challenges of life, okay? To support us in harnessing this state of not knowing, of harnessing confusion, so that we can access the power reserves within and move forward with grace and clarity, hopefully. They want to help. They do. Of course, some of our ancestors are more healthy than others, let's say. So call upon the wise ones, the healthy ones, the vibrant ones, okay, who love you, who honor you in order to guide you, right? And just listen. Listen with the non-physical ears. Listen to the voice which doesn't speak in words. Number 10, you can open yourself to receive a word for the year or day or week ahead. So in these quiet moments, you can ask yourself, what desires are being whispered to your heart? Is there a word or a phrase that simmers forth, inviting you to allow that to be a theme for the coming days or months, even year? Something that you can grow into but don't fully understand yet? What's that? Be open for that to arise, for that to come into your awareness. But don't strive for it, right? Just open yourself to receive that. And maybe it comes quite literally, maybe it doesn't. So pay attention. Okay. And number 11 is one that I don't recommend you do unless you really feel that this is something that you can hold. So you can consciously create chaos. This means consciously biting off a bit more than you can chew. Okay, this is you stepping forward and being like, maybe there will be a breakdown, but I want the breakthrough. And I know that the breakthrough comes from the breakdown. Knowing that once the storm has cleared, there comes the rainbow. there comes the realization of what's working for you and what doesn't work for you. This could be reading multiple books at the same time, working on 5 different paintings at the same time. This could be being in different containers, teaching containers at the same time. And in that sort of state of conscious overwhelm, you'll default to the path of least resistance for you, right? You'll default to what is working and what isn't at a deeper level. But that does require a willingness for there to be the breakdown of what isn't working, of the behaviors that are making it self-defeating confusion versus productive confusion, for example, and be willing for that to enter into the breakthrough. So this is not for the faint of heart, and I highly recommend that you do not do this if you don't already have a sort of strong energetic foundation and backing so that you can hold that. You can also do that in a simple way of like reading multiple books at once. Okay, so, pick the scale kind of thing. Really beautiful tips. I absolutely adore these, so I hope that they will be useful for you. This is drawing also from the work of Christine Walters Paintner, so shout out to her. All right, so we are coming to the end of this video for today. Whoa! What we've covered is how confusion, when embraced properly, really leads to growth and self-actualization. When we're speaking of harnessing confusion, we are both speaking about leaning in to the vastness of not knowing, leaning in to the mystery, leaning in to the unfamiliar. And we're also speaking about what implicitly emerges, which is actually clarity. Paradoxically, and maybe counterintuitively, leaning into the confusion is actually oftentimes what does birth the clarity. The only way out is through, right? And there's no going back. So may this be a permission slip for you to not shame or blame yourself for being in a state of confusion if there are life changes happening for you, or if you've just felt confused for quite a while in a particular area of life, like be it in your relationships, your friendships, your work, your health. Give yourself the space to lean into that, okay? To lean into that confusion and trust that by doing that, if you're open to it, right? If you're more in the productive form, being open to see what's not actually working for you. Be open to see what your strengths are. Be open to see where you have no boundaries, where you actually do need boundaries, or where you are way too boundaried and need to open yourself up a little bit more. It works both ways, of course. So confusion is also a tool. Just like fear is a tool, failure is a tool, right? So is confusion. You can learn how to harness this tool too. Okay, so yeah, I'm really excited about that for you. I also want to speak to now what the aligned action is for this week. Okay, so your aligned action for this week is to identify 3 areas of your life where you feel a bit confused, overwhelmed, or kind of stretched too thin. This could be work, this could be health, this could also be your creativity, for example. So first write down and identify those 3 areas. Then what you're going to do is for each area, after you've felt into what is actually kind of confusing about that area for you right now, define one clear boundary or limit that you could establish to create more space for yourself. This might include setting specific time slots, right? Those containers of time, or creating a physical space for you to do something like your bliss station, your focused workstation. Or even narrowing the scope of certain projects. Like if you've totally overpromised and you're now underdelivering. Okay, so 3 life areas. If you want to write down what's confusing for you about those areas, do that. The main part of this aligned action is that you're going to write out from that confusion, you're going to allow that to reveal to you a particular boundary, conscious limitation that you can put on that, so that there is more space for you, so that there is more of a withdrawing some energy, so that you're not just spreading yourself too thin. Okay, 3 areas, 3 boundaries. And then after that, I want you to write for each of them one very actionable sort of thing that you can do, a very tangible action that you can do to start to implement that boundary already. Okay? Make it simple, but also make it appropriate and relevant. Not something that's going to take you super duper long to actualize, something that you can do, even in the next few days. For example, let's say you're working with the area of creativity and you felt into what's confusing for you about it, and what's confusing for you is that you just feel lost. You don't feel any motivation to show up. You don't even know what you're doing anymore. Like, you don't know what medium to work with. You don't know what your next series should be about, or you feel sort of just deflated about the whole thing, right? Really uninspired. And so harnessing that confusion, you could then create a boundary of being like, oh my God, I feel so confused about the thing because I don't have any space allocated for my creativity. And so the tangible action is bring out my calendar and put in a 2-hour block once or twice a week to work on my creativity. And then you can get more specific about that depending on your wishes, but just keep it simple for now. That's also an example. Let's say in the area of health, you tune into why you're confused, why there's this overwhelm. And maybe for you, what comes through is that you're spreading yourself too thin by doing too many things, or by being way too exposed to the screen, right? You've just been sitting down too much. But you also got work, and you've got all these extra stuff that you're doing in the day. You're going to the gym, you're going to this, you're saying yes to everything that everyone asks of you, right? So that's leading to a sense of confusion. You don't know how to focus your energy, and overwhelm. Harnessing that confusion, leaning into it, allows you to see that a boundary that you need to enforce could be saying no to more things. Okay? That could be it. And then a tangible action that you can do is, let's say, create a it could go many ways. You could be having an agreement to yourself of how much time you're willing to invest in doing things for other people, or you've agreed to yourself that you're going to have a specific amount of time for your health and well-being. It could also be you're going to start a meditation practice so that you can center yourself and set the foundation of the day well, so that you're less scattered in the day and you're more connected to the part of you that knows what you're available for, what your resources of time and energy are actually. Okay, so this could go many different ways, but it's entirely personal and up to you. So that's your aligned action for this week. All right, we are plowing through, but we've also got lots to go. So next video, we are going to be going into the theme of illuminating the path from within, which is really beautiful. The main component of that will essentially be from the harnessing of the confusion, right? From the embracing of the failure, they all stack up on top of each other. Cool. then you're able to bring your energy within, not spreading yourself too thin, not projecting, not looking for the thing outside of yourself. And then you come home to within, you connect to your intuition, you connect to your sense of beingness, and you illuminate the path forward from within. Beautiful. All right, that's it today. Give this video a like for me, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Yeah. All right. Bye.